We've talked a lot about these resources, but what happens when we as humans are done with these resources? What do we do with it? And there's a lot of different things that we do about it, so I'm going to kind of entitle this whole section Our Waste. Where do the things that we are no longer using, where do they go? So just let's take a snapshot of just the United States. In the United States, on average, each person creates about 4.5 pounds of trash every single day. And there's about 300 million people in the United States. So as you can imagine, that is a ton of waste, an enormous amount of waste. It's actually the most amount of waste produced anywhere else in the world. So that's really not a figure that you want to brag about. That's 4.5 pounds. That's just insane. And that's a really good number for you to remember because it's so shocking, really. Now, of this waste, I want to take a look over at this pie chart. So this is released by the EPA. 2014 is the most recent one they have. And this is showing of all the things that are thrown away. This is kind of their breakdown as to what is broken, This is their breakdown of what types of waste there are. So, food, this can be composted. Paper and paperboard, this can be recycled. Glass, this can be recycled. Metals, these can be recycled. Plastics, most of these can be recycled. Leather and textiles, kind of, not really, so I'm going to ignore those. Wood can be composted. Yard trimmings can be composted. So if we look at all of this waste, we are generating 258 million tons of waste. Now, some of this is recycled and some of it is composted. Now, these figures, including the 4.5 pounds of waste, all those figures do not include recycling. But regardless, whether you're recycling or not, that is still waste. Energy still has to go into recycling in order to reuse those materials. And despite that, even if we had good recycling rates, we're still pretty bad compared to the rest of the world. In fact, about all of our materials in this pie chart, about 35% of all of our waste is recycled. And that sounds really great. And I don't want to, look down on that. But 35% would be like we recycled all of our paper and all of our metals. Well, a huge chunk of the rest of this could still be composted and recycled. So although, yes, 35% is not a bad number, we could be doing so much better. In actuality, maybe, 13% is not recyclable. We're doing pretty bad, right? 88% can actually be recycled, and we're only recycling 35%. We have a long way to go. However, what I will say is because the rest of the world is looking at us, and because we're kind of looking at the rest of the world, we realize we can do better, and we have been doing better. Montgomery County is actually a really great example of this, and we'll talk more about Montgomery County in a little bit. But it is getting better, and I feel like that's really important to emphasize. So when you throw away something, where does it go? So the first place it goes here in Montgomery County is a transfer station. You have probably driven by it if you've never actually been there before. It goes to the Shady Grove transfer station. This is right around the corner from the Shady Grove Metro and right off the interstate. Now, not all waste municipalities have a transfer station. It really just depends on the location. But at a transfer station, what happens is that all of the trash trucks go to one area, and then from there, all of that waste is then transported. Now, when I'm talking about waste in this scenario, I'm specifically talking about things that are not being recycled and are not being composted. You can see in this picture, a lot of this is plastic bags, which should make sense. You put things in trash bags, but these are the things that you're actually throwing away into the rubbish. One of the reasons they do this is depending on where the waste ultimately ends up, whether it's an incinerator or a landfill. Sometimes those are on small country roads, and you don't want hundreds of trash trucks going there every day. So instead, they build these facilities where all the trash trucks come, and then they'll load them up onto a larger form of transportation, typically a train. So first, the transfer station. Next, here in Montgomery County, our rubbish goes to an incinerator. An incinerator is pretty awesome for two reasons. One, trash is burned, so it's not sitting somewhere. It is actually incinerated. The second reason this is cool is because we're actually using that heat that is coming from burning, and we're actually using that trash as a form of energy. And we use it similar to we use coal. We burn it to boil water. That boiling water then turns a turbine, and that turbine produces electricity. So the trash you're actually creating is being turned back into electricity. Now, all waste in Montgomery County, on any end of Montgomery County, all of it goes to that Shady Grove transfer station, gets loaded onto a train, and then goes to the resource recovery facility. By resource, what we mean is really energy recovery. We're taking the energy that's stored in this trash and we're turning it into electricity. Now, we're still going to create ash. Whenever you burn something, ash is going to be left over, and there's not much we can do with it. So what we do with our ash here in Montgomery County is we do send it to a landfill, but to landfills in Virginia. And although you're like, well, we're still going to landfill, yes and no. On a landfill, what has to happen is at the end of every day, all new trash that was added has to be covered by like 1 to 2 feet of soil. And this is really for pest management. Well, instead of using nice new soil that's dug up from some hole somewhere, instead the landfills that we're sending our ash to are actually using our ash as that soil. So it's actually a win-win for us. We get rid of our ash. Yeah, it's going to a landfill, but it's taking the place of something that was clean, something that had to be dug out. So we're giving it really a new use. Any metals that didn't burn, because it's not going to really melt, are still recovered, and we recover them and actually recycle them. So it's our last opportunity to recycle some goods. Now, thinking about all the plastic that is in our trash that doesn't get recycled, that can release a lot of not so great things. Same with just burning things in general. It's going to release quite a few different types of pretty bad gases for our environment. Fortunately, just like coal power plants, just like our natural gas plants, they do have to clean the air before it gets released. There are EPA standards for incinerators, just like there are for most other types of companies. So although, yes, it is going to create some pollution, a lot, not all, but a lot of that pollution is going to get cleaned before being released back into the atmosphere. So this is here specifically in Montgomery County. There are other places in the United States and definitely other places around the world that essentially follow the same exact model. But I want to talk a little bit about landfills too, because landfills are more common. This is what you really see most places. Montgomery County is more of an exception, and some of our waste goes to a landfill anyway. So landfills are not just, hey, let's throw our trash here. I mean, that is what they are, but it's regulated. It's not just willy-nilly, if you will. So landfills are regulated at the federal level, but obviously there's not, feds everywhere watching these landfills. It's run by the state, so run by the state of Maryland or by the state of Virginia. So I want to talk a little bit about the regulations involved, because I think it's kind of important to just mention what is actually happening in a landfill. So as I mentioned before, the regulations are at a federal level by the EPA. If you don't remember or don't recall, the EPA is the Environmental, I'm not going to be able to type this, so Environmental Protection Agency. And within the Environmental Protection Agency, they created the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So resource conservation, really talking about our natural resources as well as talking about our waste, and recovery. So how do we ensure that the waste that we're producing is not affecting the resources that are around us? How do we make sure that our waste isn't polluting the environment, whether it's polluting the air, polluting our soil, or polluting our water? So when building a landfill, and this is kind of what this picture is showing you, it has to be built on good land. And what I mean by good land is it's really trying to prevent something bad from happening to it. For example, a fault line. A fault is where earthquakes happen. You don't really want to put a landfill near a fault line because if earthquakes are very common there, what's likely to happen is you're going to ruin the integrity of that landfill and have a higher likelihood of some sort of disaster that results in the landfill leaking. It also can't be near a wetland. The reason for this is that if there's ever a leak within that landfill, you don't want that water immediately entering a water body, the water of decomposition entering a water body. So yeah, you kind of want to avoid that. So we're building these landfills on places that have been geologically surveyed to ensure that's not going to cause issues. Now in this landfill, yes, it is essentially a big hole like in the earth, but it's a reinforced hole. We use a 2-foot thick layer of clay all through the bottom of this, as well as a plastic liner. And this kind of liner is like a pool liner, very, very, very thick, and there might be multiple liners there. If you know anything about clay, it's really hard for water to get through it, so it's acting as another barrier. The reason for this is that, yes, this stuff in the landfill is going to decompose. It's going to break down. However, depends on what people put in there. If people are putting paint in there, if people are putting toxic substances in there, even plastics, even as they're decomposing, the stuff they're decomposing into are not good. These are not things that you want entering the environment. So at the bottom of this, you're going to be getting like this wet slurry of stuff. You don't want that entering the environment. So this is heavily, heavily lined to avoid that from happening. As I mentioned, you're going to get this gooey, gross, liquid, trash decomposition at the bottom. There are pumps and there are different collection systems to get that out. Because again, you don't want the potential of that releasing into the environment. So in this picture, you can see a pump right here. And it has a pipe that goes all throughout the landfill that's literally meant to just pump up those liquids. Then those liquids will be collected and will be disposed of safely. There's also all of these pipes that you see. These are all for gases. So during decomposition, a lot of gases are released. But as I mentioned before, we're always covering the landfill. We're covering it with a couple feet of dirt every day. We have no way for those gases to escape. So there's different poles that are within this landfill to release those gases. And then finally, there's tons of monitoring systems. There's monitoring systems looking at what gases are being released, how much is being released, what liquids are being produced, how is the volume changing, and all this gets reported back to the EPA, just to ensure that nothing bad is happening. Because again, this can be pretty much an environmental disaster if a landfill were to be compromised.